Now, I want to tell you a little story. This is a very, very important story. It's a story I told in Liberty and Tyranny. The modern environmental movement was founded on one of the most egregious frauds in human history. That DDT is a human-killing poison when in fact it's a human-saving wonder chemical. A chemical compound developed in 1939 for use as an insecticide. DDT was critical in protecting American soldiers from the typhus epidemic and malaria during World War II. In 1948, Paul Herman Mueller received the Nobel Prize for his discovery of the high efficiency of DDT as a contact poison against several arthropods. DDT's usefulness in combating malaria and other insect-borne diseases was unprecedented. San Jose State University professor J. Gordon Edwards was a longtime opponent of banning DDT, and he wrote in 2004, "Hundreds of millions have died from malaria, yellow fever, typhus, the plague," and it goes on, and other diseases. In the 14th century, the bubonic plague, transmitted by fleas, killed a fourth of the people of Europe and two-thirds of those in the British Isles. Yellow fever killed millions before it was found to be transmitted by mosquitoes. More than 100 epidemics of typhus ravaged civilizations in Europe and Asia, with mortality rates as high as 70%. Mark, what are you talking about? Stick with me. As always, just stick with me. But by far the greatest killer has been malaria, transmitted by mosquitoes. In 1945, the goal of eradicating this scourge appeared to be achievable thanks to DDT. By 1959, the U.S., Europe, portions of the Soviet Union, Chile, and several Caribbean islands were nearly malaria-free. Journalist and best-selling author Malcolm Gladwell, you've heard of his books, Blink, Tipping Point, and so forth, recounted the successful eradication campaigns waged in Italy, Taiwan, the Caribbean and Balkans, parts of North Africa, the South Pacific, Australia, and India. He wrote, in India, where malaria infected an estimated 75 million and killed 800,000 people every year, fatalities had dropped to zero by the early 1960s. Between 1945 and 1965, DDT saved millions, even tens of millions, he wrote, tens of millions of lives around the world, perhaps more than any other man-made drug or chemical before or since. This is Malcolm Gladwell. A few years ago, the New York Times editorial page writer Tina Rosenberg explained that today, Westerners with no memory of malaria often assume it has always been only a tropical disease. But malaria was once found as far north as Boston and Montreal. Oliver Cromwell died of malaria, and Shakespeare alludes to it in 8 plays. Malaria no longer afflicts the United States, Canada, and Northern Europe, in part because of changes in living habits, the shifts to cities, better sanitation, window screens, and so forth. But another reason was DDT, sprayed from airplanes over American cities and towns while children played outside. So effective is DDT that in 1970 the National Academy of Sciences announced that, quote, to only a few chemicals does man owe as great a debt as to DDT. In little more than 2 decades, they said, DDT has prevented 500 million human deaths due to malaria that would have otherwise been inevitable, quote, unquote. But in 1962, Rachel Carson, an opponent of pesticides, succeeded in spreading widespread hysteria about DDT's effects on wildlife and especially children. In her book, Silent Spring, Carson decried the broad use of DDT. As Ron Bailey of Reason magazine wrote, Carson was an effective, let me find it, an effective popularizer of the idea that children were especially vulnerable to the carcinogenic effects of synthetic chemicals. The situation with respect to children is even more deeply disturbing, she wrote. A quarter century ago, cancer in children was considered a medical rarity. Today, more American school children die of cancer than from any other disease. And in support of this claim, Carson reported that 12% of all deaths in children between the ages of 1 and 14 are caused by cancer. Though it sounds alarming, Carson's statistic is essentially meaningless unless it's given some context, which she failed to supply. Turns out that the percentage of children dying of cancer was rising because other causes of death, such as infectious diseases, were drastically declining. It's a sickening irony that Carson's focus on children helped kill the use of DDT when malaria is the cause of death of millions of children living in undeveloped countries. In fact, nowhere in Silent Spring did Carson mention that DDT had saved tens of millions of lives, a widely known fact by 1962, but of no apparent import to her or her growing legion of adherents. The media gobbled up Carson's alarmism. President John Kennedy formed an advisory committee to investigate her claims. Congress held hearings. The Environmental Defense Fund and the Sierra Club brought litigation to pressure the government to ban DDT. Although DDT has never been directly linked to even one human death. In fact, Gladwell recounts incidents of test subjects literally lathering themselves with DDT. The EPA, which had been established in 1970, banned DDT in 1972. Its use worldwide soon plummeted because the United States and the United Nations World Health Organization would no longer provide financial support for the life-saving chemicals' use. But even the manner in which the EPA banned DDT was an abuse of both the scientific and legal process. An EPA administrative law judge held several months of hearings on DDT's environmental and health risks. In the end, Judge Edmund Sweeney, that was his name, he found that DDT is not carcinogenic hazard to man. DDT is not a mutagenic hazard to man. The use of DDT, I'm quoting from him, under the regulations involved, do not have a deleterious effect on freshwater fish, wild birds, or other wildlife. But Judge Sweeney's ruling was rejected by EPA Administrator William Doyle Ruckelshaus, who in 1972 banned it anyway. Ruckelshaus attended none of the hearings, and aides reported he had not even read the hearing transcript before overruling Judge Sweeney's findings. At the time, Ruckelshaus belonged to the Audubon Society and later joined the Environmental Defense Fund, which, along with the Sierra Club, was a budding organization that brought lawsuits pressing for DDT's ban. 2002, the American Council on Science and Health reported that 300 million to 500 million people suffer from malaria each year, 90% occurring in Africa. It is the #1 killer of children there. Overall, the ban has resulted in the death of millions. The EPA and its environmental group masters conspired in a deliberate and systematic distortion of science, leading to the genocide-like numbers of deaths of human beings throughout the world, and especially the undeveloped world. Today, the Environmental Defense Fund and the Sierra Club and scores of similar groups raise tens of millions of dollars a year to promote their causes in Congress, the bureaucracy, and the courts, are relied on frequently by the media for expert comment, and make no apologies for the consequences of their success in banning DDT. Ruckelshaus, a Republican, rose through the executive branch and has received acclaim for his public service. He served on the boards of numerous corporations. He endorsed Barack Obama for president. After her death in 1964, Rachel Carson was the recipient of numerous honors and awards. Her childhood home is on the National Register of Historic Places. The home she lived in, where she wrote Silent Spring, was named a National Historic Landmark. But there are no landmarks or memorials for those who suffered and perished from the banning of DDT. The name of protecting wildlife and children. Millions and millions of human lives were needlessly sacrificed from liberty and tyranny. Why am I talking about this? Why is DDT an issue? Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is how government works, this is how the statists work, and this is how the media work. And they're doing their work right now when it comes to the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms. The agenda they're pushing has absolutely nothing to do with the mass murders that have taken place in recent years. Nothing. Nothing. Murder rate's actually down. Mass murder rate is actually down. Tens of millions of law-abiding citizens owning anywhere from 270 to 300 million weapons. Magazines with 10 bullets, magazines with 20 bullets. Doesn't really matter. The overwhelming majority of Americans, 99.99%, who have weapons and have gotten them legally, do not commit crimes of any sort, of any kind. And weapons are in fact used to save lives. Weapons are used for self-defense, to protect family members, to protect neighbors. Those statistics are not kept by the FBI and the federal government. Even now, DDT is considered this awful poison, and it remains banned, despite the fact it could be saving millions and millions of people. You see, facts, evidence, knowledge, reason are not relevant when there's a frenzied environment created by the government and special interest groups. And there's a frenzied environment right now The government must do something to prevent gun violence. So what is the government going to do if they can get away with it? They're going to punish you, even though you don't commit violence of any kind, with guns or anything else. Joe Biden said yesterday that he and Obama take the position if they can do something that would save just one life, then it's worth it. Are they going to bring DDT back? No. That would save millions of lives. These people are demagogues. They are serial liars. They are power grabbers and they are power hungry. They despise the Constitution. They despise your individual liberty. Whether it's DDT or guns or anything else, their target is you. I'll be right back. That's right. In the name of the environment, in the name of health and safety, in the name of clean water and clean air and protecting the wildlife and especially the children, the left and its war on DDT has resulted in the death of tens of millions of people, especially little babies and little children in Africa. And they have no plans whatsoever to reverse course. None. And the science is not in debate. It's unequivocal. And yet they continue with their war on DDT. The statistics, the information about guns is also unequivocal. Do you notice Joe Biden has held his daily Pravda-like press conferences before he meets with his hand-selected groups on this gun control stuff? Have you noticed he never discusses the facts? Never. But I've been listening very careful to what he says, how these groups are spontaneously coming up with these ideas that just happen to comport with what he and the Secretary of HHS and the Attorney General and the Secretary of DHS are putting together. It's amazing. They're still meeting with people. They're meeting with people tomorrow, but his report is going to be complete, ready to go on Tuesday. Because, you see, they're open-minded. They're taking everybody's views. It's the impression they wish to give. Just like the DDT case. The administrative law judge ruled against the radical environmental groups, but he was overturned by a liberal Republican head of the EPA. And DDT was banned. Poof! Just like that. And millions of lives snuffed out with it. They don't shed a tear. They don't shed anything. Fact of the matter is, this whole so-called gun control effort has nothing to do with reality. It is an absolute attack on the individual. And I'm not hearing Republicans speak out. I'm not hearing enough conservatives speak out. I'm not hearing anything. I'll be right back.